The Leprechaun Guild. Carrie, I'll be back. I'm going to take a walk and get some fresh air. When you get back, I want you to finish the dishes and clean the bathroom, Carrie said from a back room. Okay, Roger said. I'm serious. I'm getting tired of your lazy ass. Carrie's voice muffled when Roger closed the door, as he started his daily walk alone. There was an unexpected scattered shower earlier in the morning, and for a late spring day, it was a bit on the warmer side. The air was still fresh and clean, and the wet grass struck a hue that looked a little more green than usual. Roger took a walk almost every day. He worked from home as a computer programmer, and getting outside once in the day usually perked up his mood, not to mention the vitamin D he got from the sun. He and Carrie have been married for 3 years now, and she recently quit her job after she developed back pain from sitting at her desk all day, which consequently meant that Roger had to massage her back every day, and pretty much rendered her useless for anything physical. Despite Carrie's ailments, Roger was happy most of the time, and completely miserable some of the time. He walked down the same sidewalk that circled his neighborhood up in the hills of Hope's End. Once the sidewalk ended, he would often veer off onto a narrow dirt path that snaked into a small wooded area. If he walked at his usual pace, he could make the round trip in 30 minutes, which was just enough time to keep Carrie from complaining that he took too long. He stepped off the sidewalk and onto the path, not paying any particular attention to anything, just daydreaming, clearing his mind, finding that peaceful center that hid itself deep in his brain. The sound of a twig snapped behind him. What was that? Roger said, knowing full well that he was talking to himself. Another twig snapped, but this time it was louder and sounded much thicker. Roger ran. When it came to the old adage of fight or flight, Roger had no qualms about flight, and he was good at it. He ran up the path to a clearing that overlooked a set of rolling hills, and there he saw it, the single most spectacular rainbow he had ever seen in his life. The rainbow was so close, it seemed that if he could just run a little bit closer, he could touch it. Somewhere over the rainbow, Roger heard a tiny voice singing out in the distance, straight ahead, coming from the direction of the rainbow. Who is that singing? Roger whispered. Roger was more than curious. The tone of the voice was high, definitely not a man's voice, and too mature for a child's. The quality of the vocal seemed professional and alluring. When Roger was a small child, he tried to get to the end of a rainbow. It was one of those childhood memories he never forgot. Grandmother Helen told him, "If you reach the end of a rainbow, you'll find a pot of gold." That day, when he was a child, Roger never forgot that he saw it. A small red cauldron full of shiny gold pieces, illuminated under the sparkling light of a rainbow. Somewhere over a rainbow, the voice kept singing. Roger reached the crest of a small hill, and when he arrived at the apex, his heart dropped. It was the end of the rainbow. The same small red cauldron with tiny gold pieces sat there, just like when he was a child. Roger was enraptured by the sight. His childhood innocence and the fondness of his youth all came rushing back to him in his flurry of heart-warming emotion. This time, unlike when he was a child, Roger wasn't going to take his eyes off of the prize. This time, he wasn't going to lose his footing and roll down the hill backwards away from the rainbow and watch it slowly disappear. The singing was getting louder as Roger approached the cauldron. He reached the pot of gold just as the song ended. "Hey there?" A voice spoke out. "Who's there?" Roger said. "'Tis I, Blarney." Roger looked around and didn't see anyone. "You can't see me?" Blarney said. "No?" Roger said, confused. Am I losing my mind? Roger thought. "Hold on. Don't get yourself in a tizzy. It's the light prism. I've been in a green mood today. Let me refract the colors of the rainbow." Right before Roger's unbelieving eyes, a tiny leprechaun appeared, and he was sitting on top of the pot of gold. "How's that?" Blarney said with a smile. "Well, I can see you now. I can tell that I've frightened you, but don't be alarmed. Everything is a choice, you know. Me, this beautiful, shiny gold." Blarney was about 2 feet tall, with dainty features and a pleasant-looking face. He sifted his fingers through the smooth medallions, picked them up, and listened to them fall back into the pot. "I truly love me gold." Roger was quick to respond. "That's what everyone says." Blarney's eyes went cold. "People say that I love gold?" "Well, yeah. Leprechauns are famous for that," Roger said with a smile. "They also say if you find a pot of gold, the finder can keep it, or the leprechaun can give 3 wishes. Blarney put his hand to his chin and thought for a moment. "Well, that seems like a good deal for you. What's in it for me?" Roger smiled. "I actually don't know." He walked closer to the pot of gold. "Would you like to have my pot of gold?" Blarney asked. Roger's eyes were mesmerized by the gold, and it began to glow even brighter. The pieces seemed to call out to Roger. "Come on, Roger. Just touch it." Blarney smiled. Roger was within arm's length when Blarney shouted out, "Come on, let's bag him." Roger's unwavering gaze didn't hear or see the dozens of leprechauns come walking out of camouflaged locations. They were all equal in size and had pleasant faces equivalent to Blarney's. One of the leprechauns was dragging a giant black bag toward Roger. Roger shoved his fingers and both hands into the pot of gold. He could feel the weight and the smoothness of the medallions. The black bag went over Roger, and he was scooped up. The leprechauns were jovial as they dragged Roger to Leprechaun Hollow. Leprechaun Hollow was a skip and a hop away from anywhere on planet Earth, but only if you possessed the magic of a leprechaun. Roger was hauled into a room with a special chair which sat in a center of the large room. The chair had leather straps and a buckle on the armrests and straps on the ankles. One of the leprechauns opened the bag to let Roger out. Roger sat there quietly as he looked around the room. Then he spoke. "Where am I?" he said. "You are far away from home," Blarney said. "The good news is you finally made it here." "What's that supposed to mean?" Blarney smiled. "I know you remember my pot of gold from a long time ago. Remember when you slipped on the wet grass? Of course, you were much younger then and much smaller." Blarney used his hand to show Roger's height to be about 3 feet tall. All the other leprechauns laughed. Some had smoking pipes and laughed with short, billowing intervals of white smoke. Roger didn't reply, and he was anxiously waiting as fear began to build throughout his body. "Get in the chair and everything will make sense." Blarney tipped his hat and bowed with his hand out to the chair. Roger got up and started to run. He immediately froze in place. The only parts of his body that could move were his eyeballs, and he looked around wildly. "Did you forget that leprechauns are magical?" All the leprechauns laughed again. Blarney's face turned cold. "Get in the chair." Roger unfroze, and he complied to Blarney's request. "Strap him in." All the leprechauns cheered ecstatically while they began to sing a melody that sounded like a limerick or a childhood fairy tale song. "At the end of a rainbow, a lot of gold there is. At the end of the rainbow is where a dead man lives." The song made Roger's skin crawl. It wasn't the words that disturbed him, but the feeling it conjured up in his body. Their voices made him feel ill, deep into his bones. A tiny hole opened in the ceiling, and a beam of light shone down directly onto Roger's head. "Is that the sun?" Roger thought. It couldn't be. The light was bright and gold in color, like the gold of a setting sun on an autumn day. It was too strong and too concentrated to be the sun. "Bring the horus machine," Blarney said. Two leprechauns rolled a device that was similar looking to a salon hairdryer from the 20th century. They rolled it to the back of Roger and rotated the circular dome just over Roger's head. "What are you doing?" Roger said. "Just accept it." Accept what? Roger's anxiety levels were skyrocketing. "I don't like this. Let me go." "You should be happy. You're going to be with us forever." Blarney raised his hand. "Activate the beam." A leprechaun with a beard and a lower stature than the rest pressed a button on the machine, and it moved into the presence of the light, which emitted from the ceiling. The light was now directly on the machine, and it was absorbing it. Roger felt a sensation in his head, a slight vibration that started to dull his thoughts. "Stop!" Roger yanked on his arms and the straps, which hardly moved. He did the same with his legs. "At the end of a rainbow, a lot of gold there is. At the end of the rainbow is where a dead man lives," the leprechaun said as they began to dance and cheer. Blarney happily ran out of the room and immediately came trouncing back into the room with the pot of gold and a smile on his face. The sight of the pot of gold made Roger feel happy as his mind seemingly began to melt. He stared at the shiny medallions until his vision faded to black. "Syringe," Blarney said. A different leprechaun brought Blarney an oversized syringe with a thick needle on the end of it. Blarney shoved the needle into Roger's ear and pulled back on the knob. Reddish-white liquid filled the giant vial. Blarney licked his lips as it reached maximum capacity. "Here's to another 1,000 years." The leprechauns began to stomp and clap in a tribal cadence. They chanted in an ancient language of inaudible words. A bright light blared from Roger's body, illuminating the room brighter until it blinded to an apex of white. Roger evaporated, leaving behind a shiny gold coin on the chair seat. Blarney picked up the coin and kissed it. "I love you," he said as he added it to the pot of gold that sat in front of the chair where Roger once was. A cart was rolled out with dozens of small cups laid out on it. Blarney meticulously squeezed the matter from Roger's head into each cup. The liquid was thick and viscous and remained a mellowed tone of reddish white. "Drink up, me laddies." The pot of gold reflected light onto Blarney's face, and he looked over at it with admiration and love.